Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into AI. But not just, all the fun stuff everyone thinks about with AI.
Right.
We're going to get into the more responsible side of AI, the management side. How do we actually,
Yeah. How to manage it responsibly.
how to manage it responsibly? It's one thing to have powerful AI, but it's a whole nother thing to make sure that it's actually
Absolutely.
being used to benefit everyone.
Yeah. And that's where ICIE 42001 comes in. It's a fantastic framework. You can think of it kind of like a blueprint
Okay?
that helps organizations actually develop and implement and maintain and continually improve AI management systems. So it's really that whole life cycle of
So it's not just about, like, having AI. It's about
it's not just about creating it.
treating it the right way.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about building trust and confidence in AI and making sure that it's used ethically and responsibly and effectively. And, thinking about avoiding those unintended consequences.
This is really interesting because we hear so much about like AI bias
Right.
and
Yeah.
things going wrong. Does ISO 42001 address any of those concerns?
It absolutely does. I mean, it's all about making sure that the systems are fair and transparent and accountable. And it's not just a standalone standard either. There are, other related standards like ISO 23053 and 22989 that kind of add a lot more depth to both the development and the use of AI.
Okay, so let's break this down. What's at the core of responsible AI management?
So I think one of the really fundamental concepts that we need to talk about here is machine learning. And machine learning is really how these AI systems learn from data to make decisions and predictions.
See, I feel like when a lot of people hear machine learning,
Right.
they kind of just their eyes glaze over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Can you give us a more concrete example?
Sure, absolutely. So imagine that you are building an AI system to predict house prices, right? So you would feed this AI system tons and tons of data about houses,
Right.
their size, their location, the number of bedrooms, and of course, how much they sold for. And then the AI system uses this data to learn how to predict the price of new houses. And this is what we call supervised machine learning.
So it's like we're teaching the AI to be like a real estate expert.
Right,
But
exactly.
then what if like the data that we're feeding it is wrong?
Yeah.
Like what if the data is mostly coming from like wealthy neighborhoods or something?
That's a fantastic question. And that gets at the heart of why this responsible AI management is so important.
Okay.
Because if the data is biased in some way, then the AI system is going to learn to be biased too.
Oh wow.
So for example, in your example, it might learn to overvalue houses in wealthy areas and undervalue houses in, less affluent ones. And so this is just one really simple example of why it's so important to make sure that we're using data carefully and thoughtfully when we are building these AI systems.
That makes a lot of sense. So data quality is super important. But what about the risks associated with AI? Like I feel like that's something that we hear a lot about too.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is another area where ISO IT 42001 provides some really practical guidance for organizations, to identify potential risks, things like, security breaches or unintended consequences.
Hmm.
And it can also help develop strategies to mitigate them. And it also encourages organizations to really think about the potential benefits of AI, right? What are the problems that we're trying to solve here?
Yeah.
How can we use AI to actually create positive change? But one risk in particular that organizations need to be aware of are these things called adversarial attacks.
Adversarial attacks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So imagine somebody deliberately feeding incorrect information or misleading information to an AI system to make it malfunction.
Wait, so someone could like intentionally trick an AI.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
And this is a serious issue, especially as AI becomes more and more prevalent in
Yeah.
critical applications.
Like self-driving cars.
Like self-driving car.
And if someone tripped a self-driving car into thinking that a stop sign was a yield sign,
Right. Exactly.
that's terrifying.
Yeah, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but this is a real concern. And fortunately, ISO EK 42001 really encourages organizations to think about these security risks
Mm-hmm.
and to implement safeguards to
Okay.
protect those systems from these types of attacks.
So with all these potential risks, why even bother with AI?
Well, because, when it's done responsibly, AI can be this incredibly powerful tool for good, right? So think about things like, improving healthcare diagnoses, optimizing energy consumption,
Right.
even developing personalized education programs. The possibilities are really endless.
Yeah. So it's like we really need to like walk this tightrope of,
Exactly.
making sure that we're leveraging its power, but we're also making sure it's used responsibly.
Right.
And it sounds like this standard gives us the tools to do that.
Yeah.
So how does this framework actually translate into building an ethical AI system?
So it starts with establishing, clear policies and procedures, and think of this as kind of like the ground rules, right,
Mhm.
for how AI is going to be developed and used ethically within an organization.
So it's like setting those ethical boundaries right from the get-go.
Exactly, yeah. And then it's about assigning clear roles and responsibilities.
Okay.
So, who's in charge of data quality, who's ensuring that the AI system is being used fairly and transparently, who's ultimately accountable for the AI system's actions.
So it's not just like a piece of paper. It's about making sure everyone who's involved
Exactly.
is on the same page
Right.
ethically.
Yeah,
This is getting really fascinating. But we're running out of time for this segment.
we are.
But don't worry, we'll be right back after a quick break to talk about how ISO E 42001 guides organizations in ensuring compliance and engaging with stakeholders
Right.
in the AI world.
Absolutely. So
Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about the how of responsible AI. We've established that clear policies, roles, responsibilities, those are all key. But what about the bigger picture? Where do things like regulations
Yeah.
and public perception fit into all of this?
Yeah, that's a crucial aspect that we haven't really touched on yet, and that is that responsible AI isn't just an internal matter for organizations.
Okay.
It's about engaging with stakeholders, and that includes regulators, the public, anyone who might be impacted by AI systems.
So it's not enough to have your own internal ethics board or something. You need to consider
Exactly.
the wider impact on society too.
Precisely. And this is where standards like ISO AE 38507 become really useful, right? Because they encourage organizations to be transparent about their AI practices, to seek feedback from stakeholders, and to really address concerns proactively.
So if I'm a company developing a new AI-powered medical diagnosis tool or something,
Right.
I shouldn't just launch that into the market without talking to
That value.
doctors, patients, regulatory bodies.
Exactly. Yeah. Engaging with stakeholders early and often really helps to build that trust and
Mhm.
to ensure that the AI system is aligned with, societal values and expectations.
This sounds like it could be a really tricky balancing act, though.
It is.
How do you weigh the perspectives of all these different stakeholders who might have
Right.
totally different interests, involved?
It definitely is a challenge. But open communication and a willingness to compromise are really essential.
Hmm.
So think of it as a collaborative process,
Okay.
not just a one-way street.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is all making me think about I feel like there's a lot of anxiety out there
Sure.
around AI and how it's being used. How do you address those concerns?
Transparency is key. I mean, people are understandably apprehensive
Yeah.
about AI, especially when they don't understand, how it works or who's controlling it.
Right.
And so by being open about your AI development practices, the data that you're using, the safeguards that you have in place, you can help to alleviate some of those fears.
So it's not just about complying with whatever regulations are out there.
Right.
It's about building trust.
About building trust.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah, and that trust is essential for widespread adoption and acceptance of AI.
Mm.
Because if people don't trust the technology, they're less likely to use it,
Yeah.
which ultimately hinders its potential benefits.
That's a good point. This is all making me think about, all these news stories you see about AI regulation, things like
Right.
that. Is that becoming a bigger part of the conversation?
Definitely. Definitely. Regulators worldwide are starting to pay close attention
Yeah.
to AI, and are developing, frameworks and guidelines to
Hmm.
ensure that it's used ethically and responsibly. So, for example, the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or
Right.
GDPR, it has specific provisions related to automated decision making.
So companies can't just assume they can like do whatever they want with AI.
Right.
They have to be aware of like the legal landscape too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ignoring regulations isn't just unethical, it's also a legal risk
Yeah.
that could lead to fines and lawsuits and reputational damage.
This is all really important stuff. We've talked about building an ethical AI system, engaging stakeholders,
Right.
navigating all the regulations that are out there. What else is there to consider when we're talking about responsible AI management?
So I think the final piece of the puzzle here is monitoring, review, and continuous improvement.
Okay.
Responsible AI isn't a one-time task, right?
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
So it's like tending a garden. You can't just
Exactly.
plant the seeds and walk away.
Right. You need to constantly monitor the AI system's performance, assess its impact, and make adjustments as needed.
So like what kind of adjustments are we talking about here?
Well, it could be anything, right? From refining the algorithms to updating the training data
Hmm.
to even completely redesigning the system if
Wow.
it's not meeting ethical standards or producing the desired outcomes.
So it's about being like adaptable and
Exactly.
responsive to new information
Right.
and changing circumstances.
Precisely. I mean, the field of AI is rapidly evolving, and what might have been considered, ethical or best practice a few years ago might not be today.
So you're constantly kind of like evaluating and
Hey,
tweaking and improving these systems. It sounds like a never-ending cycle.
it is, and that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Because it ensures that the systems remain aligned with ethical principles and involving best practices
Right.
and the needs of all stakeholders.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense. But how do we actually know, like how do we measure
Right.
if an AI system is actually being used responsibly? Are there like specific metrics or tools or something for that?
That's a great question. And unfortunately there isn't like a single universally accepted set of metrics
Yeah.
for measuring responsible AI. However, ISO IEC 23053 does provide some really good guidance
Okay.
on evaluating factors, such as, fairness, accuracy, and transparency.
So there's like a framework,
Right.
but like the specific details really depend on the context.
Exactly. Exactly. So for example, if you're developing an AI-powered hiring tool,
Right.
you might measure fairness by looking at whether it disproportionately screens out candidates
Right.
from certain demographic groups.
Okay, that makes sense. This all seems really, really complex, though. Are there resources out there? Are there best practices? Like, are there things that organizations can look to
Yeah.
when they're trying to implement all these standards?
Yeah, absolutely. There are many resources available. For example, there are guidelines from organizations like the OECD,
Hmm.
and the Partnership on AI, and additionally, collaborating with other organizations and sharing best practices can be incredibly valuable.
So it's not about like reinventing the wheel. There's like a community out there
Right.
dedicating to this.
Exactly. And that community is growing rapidly as more and more people recognize the importance of harnessing AI for good.
I'm really glad we're having this conversation. It's clear that managing AI responsibly is complex,
It is.
but it's also essential.
I agree. And remember, this isn't just about organizations.
Right.
Individuals also have a role to play in
Okay.
shaping the future of AI.
That's a great point, and we are going to dive into that,
We are.
and explore what responsible AI means for each of us in the next segment.
Yes, we are.
So stick with us. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into responsible AI. So we've talked a lot about ISO IEC 42001. We've talked about stakeholder engagement. We've talked about continuous improvement and all these different things. But we've been talking a lot about organizations and things like that. If organizations are doing all this to manage AI responsibly, what does that actually mean for me as an individual?
But that's a great question. And it is really easy to think about responsible AI as something that, big companies and policymakers need to worry about. But the reality is that AI is already impacting our lives in a lot of ways. And so we all have a responsibility to engage with it thoughtfully and ethically.
So it's not just about like waiting for the regulations to catch up
Right.
or hoping that, companies do the right thing. We actually have a role to play in this too.
Absolutely. Yeah, for starters, we can all become more informed about how AI works and how it's being used. There are tons of resources available online, from articles and podcasts to online courses and documentaries.
I guess it's like anything else, right? The more you understand it,
Right.
the better equipped you are to make informed decisions about it.
Exactly. And once you have a better understanding, you can start to ask more critical questions about the AI systems that you're interacting with. For example, if you're using a social media platform that relies on an algorithm to recommend content,
Right.
ask yourself.
Yeah, like is this algorithm showing me stuff that I actually care about?
Right.
Or is it just trying to like keep me on the app for as
Exactly.
long as possible?
Exactly. And how is this algorithm affecting my worldview?
Oh, wow.
Is it creating an echo chamber where I'm only exposed to opinions that already align with my own?
Right.
These are the types of questions that we should all be asking as AI becomes more and more integrated into our lives.
So it's like being more mindful.
Yes,
It's like being more critical of how I'm consuming AI in my everyday life.
exactly. And we can also advocate for responsible AI practices by supporting organizations that are actually committed to ethical AI development. Choose to do business with companies that are transparent about their AI practices and that prioritize human well-being.
So it's like voting with our wallets in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Speak up about your concerns. Contact your elected officials and just really engage in the conversation about the ethical implications of AI. The
Right.
more people demand responsible AI,
Yeah.
the more likely companies and policymakers are to listen.
That's a good point. This has been a really, really interesting conversation. Um, it's clear that managing AI responsibly is not easy,
It's not.
but it's something that is really important.
It is. And remember, the future of AI isn't preordained, right? It's being shaped right now by the choices that we're making today. And so whether it's used to create a more just and equitable and sustainable world, or whether it exacerbates the inequalities and risks that we already have, really depends on us.
That's a really powerful thought. And I think, that's a great place to leave it for our listeners today. The future of AI really is in our hands, so let's all try to do our part to make sure it's a future that we can all be proud of. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.